So, Lawrence, thank you very much for the introduction and, of course, for the invitation. I feel very honored to speak to you tonight, first day of the new decade, we could say. And yes, I've chosen a title, Constellations and Correlations. And the title of the lecture goes back to an exhibition we held in the House of Art in Budweis. It's in southern Bohemia in Czechia. And the House of Art is a rather small institution, and due to the modest side of the exhibition venue, it led to a rather specific concept. Instead of assigning individual themes or projects to each of the 5 rooms, we've decided on a superordinate setting of different images, each given a specific significance. 8 projects were juxtaposed, large urban scales next to small buildings. The precisely choreographed sequence of images challenged the perception of visitors and triggered a dialogue between the different projects and buildings. The decontextualization enabled at the same time to focus on the physical topics. It was interesting to see what was transported through images rather than plans, far from any functional and programmatical tasks. Similarities in architectural themes could be traced. The relationship of form and space. So the images show one of the exhibition rooms. They're about 30 square meters of size, and you see into the next. So it was a whole suite of rooms, and you could circulate from one to the next. In the following presentation, I would like to focus on similarities and the correlation of concepts by comparing projects of different scales. By using case studies, I illustrate how conceptual approaches are found and tested. Very often, the starting point, as Lawrence has already mentioned, are small projects. So this has to do maybe with the situation when we started 20 years ago. It was mainly small residential projects, small tasks, and we still think that the small task has a certain potential to develop further ideas and to reuse them on a bigger scale. So by using the case studies, I illustrate how the conceptual approaches are found and tested, and how these mature in the course of the further development, and how architectural topics are established therefrom. The first, between house and city. It can be seen as a strategy of gradual spatial layering, from the interior to the public space. Urban densification is the topic of the time in which economization of all action has also led to the preservation of space and ground. Ever since we started, we have been concerned with the associated possibility to react to density with the superimposition of reference spaces. In this sense, transparency of a facade allows a certain spatial participation. On the open ground plan, this idea enables to create further spatial flow. In our first residential project, we acted within a densely built area with the dissolution of the wall towards developing an open structure, almost like an archetypical shelter. We constructed an almost membran-like facade. In order to deal with primary requirements of the facade, issues such as privacy, protection, and identity, these became a separate subject. The house in Ash, for instance, it is located in the environment of predetermined space and reacts to this with an ambivalence of openness and defense. The plot of land lies in a typical 1970s housing paradise with mediocre designed houses hidden behind high fences. In a way, the situation was irritating to us because the houses weren't really seen, they were hidden. We reacted on this with a completely open structure a glass house that is fully transparent. And transparency, it's not just the facade itself, it's also the way the floor plan is organized. And this transparent house, it's covered by an outer metal envelope that stratifies the space between the street and the house. The interspace creates a duality. The house is open and at the same time veiled. The floor plan shows how open the house is. You see the structure is detached from the corners, so there's only 4 columns and 2 core elements, and you can see through in several directions. So the inner cores, they are meandering, and there's still a flow, a circular flow around these core elements. The material discreteness makes the enclosing metal envelope an autonomous exterior building component. It is perforated freely, pierced by seemingly random or natural cutouts. So it's a metal piece of about 6 or 8 millimeters, and the contractor that made it, he said, well, it'll take about 20 years until the holes have grown and the whole thing might collapse. So the house was built in 2003. We're coming close to that moment. Metaphorically speaking, the question of perception of the world poses itself. Can we recognize this as a whole, or only as an individual number of single parts creating a whole in us? Fundamental subjects relating to seeing and being seen are questioned. In the conventional housing hierarchy, the glass house stands for openness, transparency, but also self-exposure. After all, houses provide us with protection from the unconscious, the darkness, protection from the loss of self-determination and autonomy. We see the metal envelope as a metaphorical mask. A mask hides the true identity of the wearer, blinding the observer. In the context of our project, this leads to a re-evaluation and leveling of the balance of power between the contemplator and the contemplated. Here you see how the neighborhood that is kind of dull and boring, how it's puzzled up. And for us, it was always a moment where we said, oh, how interesting to see details. And we can kind of build up our own image of the environment around the house. The upper floor is punctuated by an atrium. So in the middle of the house, there's an outdoor space. It's an outdoor bathroom. Completely, you're showering outside and exposed to the weather. The untreated panel corrode. The shape will be degraded eventually. As I said, structural stratification of the facade creates an interspace that is open to interpretation and hence makes new levels of perception accessible. The corrosion of the outer layer extends its metaphorical significance by an independent time level. The garden tower in Bern. The garden tower at the periphery of Bern is extended by a circumferential spatial layer with a vegetative surface that interweaves the house with the surrounding landscape. The residential tower is part of a new housing development built on a field located at the edge of the agglomeration belt of the city. Houses, halls, housing developments and structures of various usages line the arterial road from the city, a place one would typically describe as urban sprawl. Relations to the landscape exist at the same time, so it's just an arterial road, it's really thin. If you look just rectangular to it, you have landscape that dominates the situation. The plot of land is located at the foot of the Gurten, Bern's local hill, and besides that, the views into the nearby Alpine region is stunning. The project is based on an urban planning strategy that is consciously oriented on collage and taking into account corresponding frictions arising from free sampling of different residential typologies, which also shape the task for the competition. So you see here, the whole plot was subdivided, 5 parts. You see different typologies, the high-rise building on one hand, the building on the courtyard, building in a tree grove, the atrium typology, and a house with loggias. So it was selected in the process of the competition, and we've chosen the high-rise building by coincidence, and we were competing with other teams. And at the end, all the different projects were put together. So causing a certain friction, and of course, this differs much from an overall plan. So this is a strategy, rather than a plan. For us, it was of course obvious that the situation is not really relating to the city, or not much relating to the city, and it is not really determined to be built a high-rise building on the plot of land. So the idea was to rethink the typology and to come up with a scheme that is more oriented towards the landscape than to the city. So it's more the topos, as Vitruvium would have said. The floor plan is developed on a polygonal ground shape, and you see like this circumferential space is different in depth and orientation. The house grows towards the sky. It means it also has a certain twist, and it has differing platforms. Every few platforms it differs its geometry and the size, in order to become more a body than just a single house or a simple vertical structure. The idea was to insert basins in the outer platforms that could be humus and could be planted. So we brought the plants to every floor, and a metal mesh would cover the outer structure in order to give a structure where the plants could creep on and climb on. Here, the outer skin and how it's perforated. So there's on every floor there are areas where we kind of perforated the metal mesh in order to guarantee a free view into the landscape. The visual fields created by the partial cutouts in the mesh are framed by large metal brackets. Together with the moving contour of the edges of the architecture, it becomes a leitmotif. The discrete morphology makes the interspace appear as a microcosmos between private interior and landscape. The relation of the enveloping garden creates a common identity that reinforces identification with the house and the location. As seen from the outside, the superimposition of brackets, slabs, and climbing plants generates an optical interplay between free pictorial quality and illusion, similar to a classical perceptual illusion. We've chosen plants that would let the leaves go like wild grapes or vines. So the house differs to each side, so there are different plants, and of course the color changes throughout the year. Here's a detail of one of the platforms. What is essential is that the basin is on the same level as the floor, so it's not really put on the slab, it's integrated in the slab. So the idea was to really walk out of the apartment and to touch the ground, to be able to see it as on a similar quality as when you just walk out into a garden. So the plants, they grow from the ground. Here, one last image that illustrates the situation with different structures between housing and landscape with farming, etc. So this is all close together. So the house itself is kind of autonomous within this setting. House within a house. The house within a house superimposes two identities in constructive honesty. The combination of spatial and typological systems can create atmospheric density and a high variety of spatial conditions. An original construction method and autonomous materialization is used to formulate a clear identity. The combination enhances an expressiveness and reinforces the architectural autonomy in a dense contextual environment. The residential house in Lörrach, this is a small city just on the other side of the border in Germany, close to Basel. The design of the single-family house in Lörrach responds to the apparently fast-moving new development area with an illusion in the sense of a trompe-l'œil. That means the owners, they've bought a plot of land and they've waited about 5 years to really think about building or doing a project. And meanwhile, the whole neighborhood has changed totally. So they've been the last to kind of come with a house within an existing neighborhood and freshly developed neighborhood. So for us, it was really almost frustrating, and we told them first, why don't you just sell your property? This is a horrible place. And they said, no, we stick to it. We want a good proposal for that. So we came up with as I said, trompe-l'œil. It's an illusion. Of course, it's a perspective illusion. In this sense, it's almost like a metaphorical illusion. So we've created an outer house and an inner house. So like an image to the neighborhood and a private cosmos inside this shelter. So it's like a mushroom, the first sketch. It could be a children's sketch. Normally, children would draw the chimney originally to the roof. This is my partner Daniel who did it. Yeah. and what you see is that it seems to be kind of a very simple, archaic principle. What's special about it is detached from the ground. It's like an elephant, just touching the ground in 4 positions. And we haven't gone far from that, actually. You'll just see in a minute. So this is of course a proper section, a longitudinal section, and the inner house. There is a difference in the space in between, and this sketch here illustrates the autonomous core and the second structure we inserted. That it kind of follows its own rules, and it's like a let's say Adolf Loos. It's a 3-dimensional concept with double height spaces. And in order just to create a certain autonomous, complex inner world. So this is the floor plan, and yeah, the in-between is quite clear. It differs on sides, and first of all, you walk through this outer shelter, and then you have to enter the house. So there's like 2 doors or 2 openings to come close. And we perforated the outer shelter with very. It seems random, but of course the openings were precisely positioned in order to also guarantee daylights and sight lines to the outside. So this is a model, and this is how it looks. So the outer shell is completely constructed poured in concrete. So also the roof, there is no covering with anything. It's a concrete shell, and of course what you see here is that the perforations are autonomous. They have a different order. It doesn't correspond to the rooms that are behind. It doesn't really correspond to the secondary structure. So this is how the house is facing the street, and how it's detached from the ground. It's not really clear what happens here, and you see the opening on the side, and you would first walk in that slot. So it's really slim, and it really means that you have to concentrate not to touch to both sides. This is one of the in-between spaces. It's it could be parking lot, but it could also actually now they don't own a car, so it's a place for children to play, and of course this reminds you maybe of farmhouses where you have the house house and the stables besides it. So in Switzerland there are typologies like that where you just have the extension and it's an outdoor space where chicken would run through and people could work during bad weather. And here this shows the double height space inside, and of course this secondary structure is completely made out of wood. So we've inserted it, and it was a very simple, handcrafted way to construct it with it's almost like the Americans 2x4, and the frames, the primary structure is also the frames of the windows, and we've just filled them, with huge window panes. And this here illustrates a little bit the complexity of the inner space. We also try to not just to build floor-to-ceiling high doors, but also to create openings that would give the possibility to change a certain spatial inner transparency. So to the left here, this is an opening. It's actually a wall, an inside shutter. And this is a children's room. Here you see a ladder. This is a double height space, a library. It's really a very small double height space, so you could even kind of climb from the upper level to the lower level. And it's all painted in black, of course, to kind of increase the homey atmosphere in a certain way, and to also increase the difference between the inside and the light that comes through the punch-outs. Yeah, stacking of different forms. And here a last image from outside. The conceptual approach creates spatial density and complexity that is continued through an unusual material inversion. The gap between ground and concrete shell reinforces the physical impact of the shell and house by suggesting that the wooden structure carries the heavy load of the concrete shell. Spazi per l'Accademia di Architettura in Mendrisio. So this next project is an extension project of the Accademia di Architettura in Mendrisio, so the architecture school in the southern part of Switzerland. In the Mendrisio project, a similar concept is used and adapted to the situation. A stony jacket is lowered into the ground that encloses a slim timber structure. The open campus of the Mendrisio School of Architecture is located outside the nucleus of the old city, in a park-like area with mainly solitary buildings from the last centuries. There are like Italian palazzos from the Renaissance and the Baroque, and the school has kind of adapted these structures for their purpose, and now there is a certain need of densification in an area that is predestined by these existing historical buildings. So it's a kind of a leftover plot of land surrounded by three structures from different periods and different functions. Our project is here in the middle, and you see the difference in proportion inside. So on the left-hand side we have the Chiesa dei Cappuccini from 1600 and the Palazzo Turconi in the very back. This is part of the school, of the campus, from 1860. And on the right-hand side, this is a now built project from Mario Botta, Rotunda. It's a cultural venue for the school also. And we were asked to extend it with a workshop, and it was obvious to respect the situation with the historical monuments and to lower it into the ground. The idea was to come up with a fourth typology, with a shed hall, and to kind of combine this, or to see this as an ensemble altogether. So this was the floor plan, and you can see the proportion. It's rather a big big field that we occupy, and besides the church, it's even smaller here. The big palazzo, of course, a lot bigger. The rotunda is also smaller, but in the inclination, it's a rather small building. So the jacket that we inserted follows the outline of the property. So it has this rather awkward shape, and here's some apse-like areas that are growing under the topography into the hill. And the inner part here, this is what we kept free to insert the second structure made out of wood. Here in the cross section, this part here is attached to the existing building, and now the front facade will illustrate the strength of, or the size of the different houses of the different buildings. And for us this was an interesting reference where we said, okay, we just have the last option to position a piece, and it's rather small, it has a certain, but still it has possibly a great impact on the whole ensemble, on the whole setting of the buildings around it. So here first sketches of the inner structure made out of wood, as I said. So this follows kind of a rather wood-oriented construction principles. So we've worked out different principles to organize the shed or to construct the shed. We came up finally with this idea of hanging poles and binders, in order to have a rather very simple orthogonal organization within the area of the roof. The light comes in from one side, so this was an option to it. Finally, this seems to be very interesting because the knots can be constructed simply just in wood. So we don't need a lot of metal elements to bring this together. A didactic approach has been developed from simple conceptual sketch with the more pronounced expression of two autonomous principles of construction leading to a clear readability. A constructively honest and atmospherically dense realization is aimed at. Intimacy and size. The topic intimacy and size describes the relationship of the individual to the space of imaginary dimensions. Differences between spatial concepts are hardly illustrated more clearly than in a comparison of a private residential house with an office building. A residential building is generally composed of numerous usage parameters leading to different spatial configurations. In opposite, an office building is mostly the result of a spatiality determined by optimized workplace economy and a high demand for flexibility. Even more interesting when spatial concepts can be developed which permit a new establishment of human scale and combine this with spaces of imaginary dimensions. The single-family house in Binningen, this is also in the agglomeration area of the city of Basel, it's situated in an enclosed plot of land in a topographical depression, caused by previous excavation work. So this means it was really kind of a funny story. This plot of land has been owned by a family, and they had a project. They already started with excavation work, and somehow it fell apart, the whole project, and they sold the plot. And the authorities would regard this as the actual topography of the plot. As you can see, it's rather low compared to the other buildings all around. It's all residential, so it's not really, I mean, there's no exaggeration in verticality. So the idea was to develop rather a specific concept that is oriented inwards, like a typology of an atrium building, we could say, with a circumferential wall. This external hermetic character results in an intimate spatial concept. A prime feature is an open atrium in the center of the main volume, around which the usage areas are arranged. So this is a silhouette of the building, and there's just very few elements that would illustrate that it's a residential or it's a house. So there's one, so the garden is on this upper level here. This is just filled with ground, with earth. And there's one single slot, and you have the chimney, and you have a window facing the city. The atrium in the middle penetrates the full height of the building volume and is visually connecting the two stories. By planting small robinia trees, one is moving about at the height of the crowns of the trees on the main level of the house. So this is the perforation. So the house is mainly organized on this upper level. This is the entrance level with secondary spaces. As you can see here, so this is almost a plaza-like size. The entrance is fully covered with bricks. And here this would be the place with robinia trees. And the upper level is organized around this void, this becoming here the open heart of the house. So the main orientation is towards the inside, and of course you have the garden that has this enclosure or the surrounding walls of different heights. Here a few images coming from outside. This is the patio, the void, and the planted trees. A few images coming from the entrance door to the inside, and you see here the house is like an open structure. On one hand you have the garden, on the other hand the inner void. And here's some details how the framing of the window continues into inserted wooden elements in order to kind of create a very domestic atmosphere, a very homey atmosphere. The atrium in the center, since it cannot be entered, its impact is one of calmness and serenity. A haptic relation to nature is replaced by a pictorial, poetic one. So this is the normal daily situation. So you're always referring to this. It's like an aquarium, you could say, being within the crowns of the trees. The densely and proximity of the vegetative space becomes the narrative motive of the house. So this is the rather specific space of the house. Besides, of course, the garden itself, there's a basin and the structure and the pergola, and you would always refer back to this inner void. Of course, the water runs outside. There's a pool, and it looks nice in the summer. The structure completely made of concrete, here visualized in this concrete model. The headquarters of the Credit Suisse in Geneva. The house was built in the 1930s. The original spirit of the building, it needed to be revitalized. A new atrium becomes a main inner space to serve as a generous public area, as well as being seen as a transmitter or mediator of the inner organization of the bank. The bank building is occupying a neuralgic corner position in the historical heart of Geneva. It is to be reorganized to represent the bank in the city center. So this is the position here, really prominent at the river, the Rhone, and also at the corner position of the nucleus of the ancient city. The house was built in the 1930s in the style of the Italian Rationalismo. The original esprit has disappeared through numerous structural changes, while its material strength could still be sensed in the existing structure framework made of stone. So when we entered the competition, we were searching for old material, and we came up with we found these old images, and we thought, although the house is completely different, maybe we can kind of find a way back. So this is the scheme. We kind of clarified the structure, and you see this in the following images. This is the existing, so a lot of verticality has gone by inserts and small proportion of windows, and we wanted to kind of bring back a certain monumentality and very certain simpleness. It's just a structure with infills out of glass. So it's more a structure than a full building with all elements, but still it follows some tectonical issues or some tectonical topics. So obscuring elements that interfered with the impact of the building in the last decades were removed, and the structural facade made of stone worth retaining, supplemented by conforming concrete elements. The resulting simplicity and clarity creates calmness and a certain presence in a heterogeneous environment. The external austerity is contrasted by the atrium inside, which allows visual dialogue between the various usage areas. In terms of construction, the stony casing is matched by a finely defined structural grid. So the floor plan on the ground floor level enabled us to open up to a whole front here, the house, and to kind of come up with a plaza-like inner atrium area. So this would be accessible for public, and the upper levels with office spaces could also be looked at. This is the wide stairs, and here the upper level, where you have a kind of a rigid organization and also a rigid grid that we inserted that would be overlaid by a polygonal structure of bump outs, elements that would scale down from the big scale of the floor plan down to human scale, elements that would kind of stick out of this primary structure. And what was essential was, of course, the question of discreteness. How much do I see from what is happening inside the bank? The bank was open to a certain dialogue, but of course it was essential not to see everything. So we sandblasted the elements, and as you can see, they're frameless. They're inserted in the primary structure of white concrete, and they create a kind of a illusion at the same time as showing what is behind. So the small dimensions of the bump outs result in simultaneous enclosure and exposure in the open space of the atrium. The individual rooms serve as places for personal retreat. People can be seen moving about. Contours appear and enter into visual dialogue. Vis-à-vis to each other, they experience a sense of community created by looking into the open central space. Just like when people stand next to each other in a museum and look at the same picture. They don't know each other, and yet they enter into a form of communication at that moment. This creates a specific combination of aloofness and intimacy. The room can therefore be regarded as a synonym for a special kind of togetherness. load-bearing core. Today's mixed constructions obscure the legibility of structural principles. Contrary to this, dealing with old existing buildings can reveal new possibilities in a quest for congruence of structure and space. The summer house in Linesho, it's located in the south of Switzerland, in a, we would say, remote area, or meanwhile it's quite remote, because, people are leaving from the valley. Originally, and that's quite interesting, most people lived from the forest, from the chestnut trees that grew in this forest, or that still grow in the forest. So they said one family needed one tree to survive during wintertime. So they dried the chestnuts. They had a certain infrastructure in their houses. They dried the chestnuts and they made different sorts of pastry, whatever. Still fantastic recipes, of course. Yes, but the summer house, it was an existing structure that was abandoned for more than 50 years, and besides the surrounding stone wall, which held through these decades, the inner wooden structure, it completely collapsed. Even the roof collapsed, and when we visited the place the first time, it was kind of interesting that a three-story house with very, low ceilings originally, it became suddenly like a chapel, like a very different principle of space. And the idea was to keep this and to build up a secondary structure, or let's say a primary structure, in order to reinforce the leftovers of the house. So this is the structure we poured in. It's a concrete model. In real, we've never seen it because, of course, it's hidden behind the existing wall. And you can see the form. It follows a certain logic of the existing volume, but still there are different proportions, such as these slots here. I can't say windows, it's just slots, which are double height. And there is here a framed opening, of course a chimney, and here also a framed connection to the annex. The annex has just one layer of concrete that is poured in. So here you can see the cross-section. So originally there's been 3 floors, stables underneath. This is the heating. You have animals under the ground that would give you sufficient heat for a certain period. And of course, people would work here on this level and sleep up on the second level. Just a few elements that show the changes of the house. This is the only window we've created, and here you can see the inner structure. There is still a second level up here. We'll call this the alcove. So it's a fireplace that once it's really heated, it keeps the warmth inside, and it gives enough warmth also to sleep here during cold periods. The door here is inserted in an existing opening, so it's not a change in the outer volume. So it was, of course, appreciated to also to have a direct access from the upper level, and therefore be able to circulate through the house and around the house. The slots, they're double height, as I said, and of course this reveals the existing outer house. So you have a dialogue between the two histories. The house as a ruin, as it has just been found, and this inner structure with a total new proportion and expression. As I said, it's almost chapel-like, the height. These are not windows, these are just shutters. So once they're open, you're also exposed to the climate, to the outside climate. If it's too cold or windy, you close the shutters and you have this one glazed window to bring sufficient daylight into the house. here once again, and of course you can see how it's poured in layer by layer, and this is also being shown in the way the concrete was poured. One more image, and we come to the annex. And the annex, it used to be the place to dry chestnuts, and we've changed it all around and said it's not for fire, it's for water. And why not have a basin inserted? And of course the shower needs to be high enough in order to kind of cause a certain water pressure. We're out in the wildness of the valley. Yes, so the collapse of the existing structure gave a new spatial possibilities and was the starting situation for a homogeneous single-room house. The bareness of the poured-in concrete continues the history of the house in an authentic manner. A unity of space, structural form, and material enriches its existence. The Kunsthaus Basel-Land, a similar topic, not yet built. Unfortunately, we're working on it. Well, we restarted this year, or we will restart this year. With the insertion of a homogeneous concrete body, an existing low-grade structure could be kept and transformed. In the case of this exhibition venue, the Kunstverein Basel Landschaft, it's the art society of the canton Basel County, is to have new exhibition premises. An old storage building located at the development site Dreispitz is available for this purpose. Options include change or use or new construction. The single-story hall served as an intermediate storage space for merchandise and has a correspondingly rudimentary construction. The basic structure consists of a filled-in steel frame construction with the truss beam roof. It's covered with corrugated fiber cement sheets. Limited availability or limited available load-bearing capacity would hardly have been able to cope with the initial weight of the retrofitting requirement to improve thermal efficiency. So a replacement building was therefore the obvious option. So these are structures that that are dominant in this area. So it used to be a freight area with a lot of exchange, also with access, railway access. So it also gave the structure, the main structure, to the whole area. And in case of the hall, this is the hall from the, I would say, 1940s, I guess, when it was built. So it wasn't sufficient. You see this in this image, how slim the beams are constructed. And when we started with the competition, we had two options. We could tear it down, replace it, and we thought this, of course, doesn't make sense to. This is a simple structure, just really horrible and of no use. But and then we had a dialogue session with the jury, and finally it was the question: what is the Kunstverein aiming at? Who's the audience? And as this site is also the site of the new art school, it was obvious to kind of ground it, or to keep it as this, or to continue with the history of the site. And as it was a transitory space for goods, we thought, yes, it's a flexible art space. That's about the same thing. So why not keep it? Yeah. So of course, Gordon Matta Clark, great how he made a big issue out of cutting existing structures and kind of transforming them just to bring in daylight. So that's what we thought. So the only thing that is missing in this hall, this old hall, is a central light. So the light that you need for exhibition venues. And of course, the second structure, this is also an example from an artist, Sarah Oppenheimer, that would have its own rules, its own identity in a certain way. And this was how we started. So we decided to work with existing parts of the form of this very simple house and combine it to a more meandering element. So this is the actual form that we pour in concrete. So this, you see, there are intermediate levels here, and finally parts that would be open, full height, and there's 3 towers that perforate the roof, or they don't perforate the structure. They're so slim just to go in between, but they would perforate, of course, the covering of the roof. Now this is how it could look. And the organization, of course, the structure also kind of dominates the interspatial organization. You see double height areas here with the zenithal light that will be inserted through the 3 towers, and then areas that are just of a height of 3-4 meters. And on the upper level, again, you have here the double height areas and the surrounding walls. Some openings would enable people looking downwards from the upper level. This is what you can see here in this image. So there's a certain visual contact, but in general, the beams, the concrete beams, they also serve as exposition walls. So this is the maximum height of the inner space. So in some parts it really goes up full height, and then you have niches and rooms of different sizes. And of course, we made studies with the daylight, and it's not a museum situation. So it was clear we do not have to provide a homogene light situation. So it's more the idea to have a light impact that might also change during the day. And that brings in another quality of light. So the main light situation is guaranteed by LED, and we've seen these towers as the more the brilliance of the light that would come from the sun. Here the longitudinal section and the cross section, where you can see the proportions and how it's positioned. There is a structure from Herzog de Meuron, here residential, very nice project, and big. The Danish office constructed this extension, built on an existing house as well. And here we have the tower with for the art school. And it's just in the direct neighborhood, and of course, to go very high, it has to do with the very heterogeneous situation, with the overall situation. And what is special is that most of the storage halls have already been replaced, so it was also an idea to just keep the small size and the small height and extend it in certain positions. The combination of 2 structural principles illustrate the development in the use of this transitory place. The light admits through the zenithal openings, and it creates a suitable space for art. Physicality. 2 morphological approaches are compared under the title physicality. Their strategy is comparable in the genesis of form: a house in the free topology and a house in an urban context. One can be seen as based on an add-on principle. The other is rather based on subtraction from a blank form. The house in Hertenstein. Well, it's located in a rather spectacular natural panorama, and it presents itself from a plot here in the central area of Switzerland. You can see this is the lake of Lucerne. It's a lake that is meandering, and that has, in certain moments, it has the quality of I would say, Norwegian. How are they called, these Norwegian fjords? Thanks. So it can be really, you can have steep hills directly growing out of the ground. And so we came up with this project. It is more a composition of elements, and it is maybe a little bit poetic or too poetic. It's or formal in order to. Or we try to kind of mirror the grandezza and the greatness of this natural situation, and so it's a concept that reaches out. So it's based on an addition of simple volumes, and has of course depth and different proportions. Here you have the volume in a model. So it's composed of different elements, and here in this image you see the framing of the main body that is kind of cantilevered, and that, as I said, that would create in-between spaces. So there's the main body, and in-between areas such as a patio in the back and covered areas in the front, and there's a patio like in between or created by a cutout. So the idea was to at the same time to create a variety of spatial conditions. The superimposition and penetration of orthogonally arranged panels and beams create the rhythmic composition. Layered spatial zones open up successively from the inner density, seeking a connection to the surroundings. The basic volume is calculated on the basis of a simple addition of rectangular bodies, placed in a staggered arrangement, leading to diverse room dimensions. Courtyard-like inner spaces, interspaces, allow a further meandering of the facade design. Being more vertical in the back, so you would enter the house here on the upper level. This is the entrance level. The patio is already on the main level. And these, as you can see, the structure kind of reaches out towards the landscape with these gestures, just cantilever beams or frames that describe an in-between space. So this is the composition, and when you approach, there's already a certain verticality, the opening. Once you enter the house, you glimpse part of the landscape. So it's only a certain, it's an in-between space between two parts of the volume. Here we have the upper volume with the addition of pergola-like elements and, of course, wooden beams. Here as a subdivision, the secondary structure, and the main floor plan, and finally the view into the landscape, which is also meandering. And yes, the vibrant photograph tries to illustrate, or this photograph tries to illustrate the rhythm and the composition of the house. A comparable approach of intention, however, is based on the basis of other spatial and functional conditions. It's an urban block of an area that has been redeveloped, a former industrial area close by a residential zone from the 18th and 19th century. So transitory activities are shaped by the location right next to the road traversing the city and the railways. So this is the plot of land for the Volta Centrum, and it's determined by tunneling work for the motorway link from France to from Germany to France, vice versa, and this is actually the leftover plot here, a triangular plot. With the program that had to be organized, and we came up with an idea or we tried to scale down the house in a certain way. Although we knew the program is quite big for the plot, in correspondence to the existing urban fabric. We tried to came up with the idea of responding a form, so it is in certain parts changing, and this it has to do with the existing form of the neighboring buildings and of the neighboring situation. So this maybe illustrates it. There is a curved house right north of it. And we added a curved element, and there's let's say an existing perspective and an existing geometry from the access road that we worked with, and of course the railway. Formal railway here is already protection, and it's a rather small pavilion-like building, so it couldn't, as public building, it could never be as dominant as the new construction. So here, this is the form how it's substructed from this triangular piece, and we perforated it with 2 punch-outs. In order to organize courtyards. The courtyards, they would start at the 3rd level, so it's also multi-use with office area, with shop areas on the ground floor plan, and residential built up on it. But the idea was to kind of create a form that unsharpens, so it's not really a tectonic project. So the idea was to really have just one identity, one simple form. Here the ground floor plan, multifunctional, very open, and the layout of the apartments certainly follow the outer contour of the building, beginning at in a rectangular situation, but moving towards rather polygonal room typology and organization. There's an apartment that is in between the 2 courtyards that kind of faces both. The house is poured in concrete, and we've used a rather special technique. It's concrete that got a certain period of use. It's insulating concrete. It's a light concrete with that would even swim. Very porous, and this model, it's scale 1 to 50. We've used the same material, and so just to illustrate what would happen. But of course, if you scale it up to the 1-to-1 size, we knew that the form would be strong enough because it's so freely shaped, and even we could convince the contractor to go this direction and to use this material. Here again, there is of course a little tectonic, because the opening here describes or a very open gesture, but the windows are of similar size, not even depending on the side of the building. And this is the front. You can enter the plaza from the bridge directly via the spiral stairs, and once you go around, you see how the form evolves and how the loggias kind of create a certain depth in the facade. The flush parts, they're necessary because of the actual noise situation. So the flush situation is created by a second window that is open but has a certain sound buffering effect. So this was the idea, to kind of create different appearances within the context. Here again, you can see how this sticks out. It's the highest building in the neighborhood. Well, slightly higher, of course, not a high-rise, but it kind of goes into a dialogue with new and existing. So this is also a rounded house here. So it would be kind of very much relating to the existing geometry. And of course, again, the courtyard, they're not, or a similar topic as this freestanding house with the atrium. The courtyard wouldn't be accessible. So we thought it doesn't make sense. It's rather stronger than to just regard it as a more poetic idea of garden and wildness within this very densely organized volume. What's the positive effect of the polygonal shape? You never have a vis-a-vis, a face-to-face, so it's always a kind of a certain flow. And what is interesting, the second courtyard cuts out a part, and here you have certain reference to the scale of the city and of the neighborhood. From the in-between volume, you trace part of the city, and of course, it's a very intimate space here between the two houses. Despite or because of the physical size, the building generates identity and hence has an integrative impact. It is a permanent component of the city and extends the morphological experience of the residents. So the next topic, I would like to end the presentation with two more projects that follow a more material-oriented strategy to interweave with the context and its history. The bricolage of found materials following simple constructive principles can be used to anchor a house in a historical site and may create an atmospheric dense situation. This goes in the line with the post-war as found principle. So the first would be the house in Münchenstein, a residential area. We would say a garden city. So this is a Swiss garden city area from early 20th century with very nicely detailed houses. And what's specific with this site, don't have a house of the former expression of the former building. The houses were normally double houses in order to create a certain bigger appearance and to bring people or several parties under one roof. Of course, this was one of the ideas of the garden city movement. We had to replace this part because it just simply didn't work anymore. It was in a bad condition, and so we came up with the idea, and it has to do with the organization and how the houses are oriented. They still have this kind of representative or representational aspect to address to the street. But what was interesting that they hardly have a dialogue with the gardens behind, because the gardens were being regarded as something functional. Of course, you would maybe plant your veggies there, but it's not of course a concept of being in a dialogue with greenery and with the garden. And so we saw this as a chance to reposition the house, or to organize it, or to press it into the plot. That's the whole depth of the plot, and the idea was to rather create a pavilion-like structure that could more be seen as a secondary structure, because loads of houses they've become too small, and people would just build annexes and secondary structures, and so that was the idea, to kind of camouflage the new volume and make it look as if it were a pavilion or a folly just standing there in the garden. So it's really, we could also call it naked house, So it's really cut down to the very principal form of a house. And as you see in the proportion, it appears very slim, or slightly slimmer than the existing, but it has an evaluation into the plot. Yeah, to make it usable and accessible, or the garden accessible, we created elements to shape the garden or to extend the form of the house, is what you can see here. And so it is a different proportions. So it's rather long and rather slim. This is the shelter, the sun shading that could be used to cover big parts of the ground. So it's a very simple layout, just a rectangle form and some core elements that structure the floor. And what's kind of interesting, the bathroom is at the same way, it's a circulation area, so you walk through the bathroom. And here, this is what happened to the situation. So this is the remaining part of the double house. And this is the new house standing in the garden and opening up, and it's covered with a bitumen, I don't know, bitumen, yeah, I guess so. So very simple material, and that would also enable us to cover the whole volume with the same surface from the roof and vertically, just to have this very, it looked like something very simple. Here, the sheltering, shading, rather big elements. It's almost the size of the roof, or twice half of the roof. And how it's inserted in the greenery in the garden and the existing. Again, this image, very simple material being used in the inside. It's in general a wooden construction with gypsum boards, controlled framing of the outside, and yes, simple or minimalistic detailing. Sliding door here to close the bathroom. And one last image to illustrate the outer structure and this kind of sanded surface, and at the same time reflecting the light in a certain quality. Yes, the last project is located at the formerly freight railway station at an area, it's called Erlenmatt. It's in the northern part of the city, and it has been transformed into a residential area, and this is the in-between area or period. It has been used as a cultural place, as with very many ephemeral structures, with locations to party. And so there was a certain period of growth on the whole land and transformation. It was for almost a decade. It was the cultural hotspot of the city, and but the urban layout was made, and the only thing that is kind of remaining from that period is the inner park-like area that is not really much conditioned. So it has this ruderal, this very natural-oriented vegetation. So it's not controlled, or very little controlled. And what is interesting is that this whole area, the land was bought by a foundation that was interested in controlling the programming of the plot. So they subdivided the area, and they were inviting interested groups to apply to loan one of the plots. So this was a great possibility for young cooperatives to organize themselves. So it's very interesting in our case. It's not people that were intending to organize themselves as a cooperative. It was just people that said, we simply don't find, we want to live together, we simply don't find any house that fits to this idea. And so they handed in a proposal, and it went into a dialogue, into a dialogue process with a competition, which we could, where we could succeed with our proposal. Yeah, it's a concept with a very high variety of apartments. So this has developed in the following phases, but of course it was already clear that it should be based on shared space also. So there are areas for everyone, accessible for everyone, and what you can see here is a cluster apartment, and here a two-room apartment with a very simple layout. It's accessible from extended balconies, you could say, from a veranda-like space. We run out of battery here, but maybe here this could help. And the shifting here is very effective to kind of have two parts of the way we organize the floor plan. So one part is facing the central garden or central park, and the other is attached to the access balconies. So it is rather open here to the circulation, and by having this shift, a certain intimacy is given in the back of the house. So entrance will also be organized as the kitchen. There's of course a given urban form that we had to follow, so it's not really fully organized. These models are from the process after the competition, the participation process, with different let's say think tanks and possibilities to bring people closer to the project. So we handed out these models to make future inhabitants familiar with the layout and of course to make them understand how the house or how the apartment would work. This is the ground floor level with a lobby-like area. This is combined with laundry, so we can really guarantee a certain frequency throughout the day. And the layout here with the two sides. So the interesting thing with the given form is that we, by having this access area, we have already a kind of an overview here. Once you access the house or your apartment, you know exactly what's going on in the whole building. Yes, thanks to the previous architects who designed this, but we were the only ones to come up with the idea with this balcony. Yeah, it shows that it's very effective. Yes, in talking about bricolage. This is what came out with the facade, and although the form has nothing to do with any secondary structures, with any ephemeral garden house, industrial sites, uncontrolled stuff, but still the idea was to build a facade that appears as something simple. Although it's well organized, there is also, of course, a verticality with a socket and different bands with aluminum sheets and undulating fiber cement and undulating fiberglass elements, semi-transparent. But these elements, of course, they are actually only known from garden structures, simple secondary structures. Here is the backside with a steel structure that is added on to the main concrete body, and using very thin profiles. It might even it could be seen as scaffolding. It has about the same proportion, or it's a little bit thicker, of course, but it still has this very ephemeral expression. Tectonics, as I said, and here the very ends, both ends are accessible vertically. This is how it looked before inhabitants came in. Of course, it changes. The secondary subdivision of the apartments, as well as the facade itself, is constructed in wood, so it could be replaced. Only the subdividing walls between apartments is made of concrete. So it's really also in a way didactic. You have the cement floor, cement ceiling, cement subdivision walls, and the inserts. The kitchens were colored in different colors, so inhabitants could also choose from a variety of colors. And so it has on one hand this very, very also almost minimalistic expression, but it's determined, the surface, it's a wooden surface, so you don't have to hang images, it's already, the image is there. So Adolf Loos, thanks to Loos, maybe this one image of what happens, still people hang images, of course. And have lamps, and this is summer situation, urban gardening, of course, is a must-have, and the access balcony. By the way, this is not true. This is not things that should be sold. It's not the storage that is outside. This is furniture. So going back to one of the remarks we had, or maybe this was given the idea. Great. It was quite a far way to go and to be able to do this, because at the same time this is fire escape area, and you have a fire load on the balconies. And as I showed here in one of the previous here, which is that there is 1.20 meters will always be free, and this, in Switzerland, well organized. People are allowed to position in the marked areas. And of course, fire authorities or fire protection authorities, they would come once a week or whatsoever to check if it's happening or not. This is about it, or the conclusion. What is essential in our work is the search for specific, perhaps unexpected characteristics that come out of the development of a particular project. Often these result from intuitive decisions, and if pursued, they can further draw out the inherent uniqueness of a project. Thank you very much.
Andreas, thank you very much for that. I think this is not quite on coming on. No, it is. It's green, but it's just not playing. Well, there we go. No, it's still not. Well, I don't think
now it's yours.
Is it now? No, it's still not. I'm just projecting. But we've got time for some questions if you have energy after a long
It's coming again. Thank you.
But I'm tempted to say that we could have titled this provocation. Because I was struck by the fact that so many of the projects began with a sense of being provoked by something you found in the landscape, and then it seemed to me you responded with a counter provocation, and I was struck by the relationship between the way in which you told that story and the structure of complexity and contradiction in architecture. And I was wondering, do you teach with that book? as well.
Not much. No. But maybe we should.
Well, I don't know. But, it seemed to me that a big part of what is being argued in that book is that there are a series of provocations that come from a layered history, or they come from an argument about landscape, or come from a recognition of some kind of demand being imposed from the outside, and yet there's always this finer purpose and sense of purpose about an inner world that has got to be protected. And in a sense, the architecture is always working to, as we were talking about earlier, to accommodate the two. And what I really felt was that there was a way in which your responses were always looking for that opportunity of maximizing the role that architecture might play in the thin dimension of the envelope, and you're always delaminating it and opening that up as a space in which you can work to expose that relationship between inside and outside as two different kinds of provocation. I was quite moved by that. Now, I don't know whether you'd like to comment further on that as a pedagogy.
It's just fantastic to how you analyze our strategy, finally. Of course, you're right, and of course we kind of look for options. In very many cases, it's really it's also difficult to deal with nowadays situation, and maybe just to build a single family house in Switzerland is something you shouldn't do, and that's why we said, well, when we do it, we think there is a task. It's a task, and we should do something that is just more than delivering a house. And maybe from that, it's the way we think about architecture in general. That it also has to bring something or maybe provoke in a certain way. What's a provocation? What's that? I mean, how far do we go? We're just building houses, and houses are part of the public area, and the public it's still in our country. There are very many moments of dialogue about architecture. So it's really there's a let's say a democratic process to end with architecture, and on very many levels you have to explain, and this is a long way, but still we find it interesting to ask these questions, or for us to make things just more interesting than they seem to be, or otherwise we don't lift the pencil.
Yeah. No, it's absolutely beautiful work. Irene, you have a comment, question.
I find your work very rigorous and refined. I would say all of it. And for me, what is enigmatic and disconcerting is the immense variety from one project to the next. I'm sure this comment must be made very often. And as one sees, of course, quite a few projects, one starts to see a number of themes, craft being one, I suppose form being another. But I think it would be helpful, certainly to me, if you could just do a kind of sketch of how you see your work in the context of architecture in Switzerland, or perhaps in Basel, in the recent past, because we, of course, know those works, and I would be interested to get a sense of how your office positioned itself in relation to that work.
Very
It's a simple question, yes. As you know, Basel is also dominated by a great, fantastic big firm. And so where do we position ourselves? In a certain niche, maybe, but still we're competing on the same levels. As we are always competing in this, and that was maybe interesting in this dialogue between, on one hand, the very private houses, maybe also private commissions, and the other projects that are all the result of a dialogue with a competition. So where you really have to also follow a certain task, and where you have to deliver a precise result. And for us, the interesting thing is really the freedom with the small houses, that we face the owner one-to-one, and we talk about this, and it's not that we build houses and someone moves in. It's really a different way of approach, or a different way of method, rather than a competition where you're completely mostly you're in the office, and you have a dialogue within the office or with partners outside, and you try to trace and to come very close to what is needed, or to make it even better. So it's just two methods that are very different, and we find it interesting to learn from both, and to maybe, as I tried here, we think the architect is, for how long are you at school here? A few semesters, and then you're out there. And what have you learned? A little bit about residential, and a little bit about here, and maybe once a school, but not an office building. So you have to learn it by yourself, and it's actually the practice that's I spent just a few years being educated, and the last 20 years I do it myself, or I do it in dialogue, or of course with students when I'm a tutor. And so this is the situation. We also have to adapt to new conditions and new situations, new programs, and the new situations they're always given. So, in a certain way, this is decontextualized. But we say these projects, they are contextual. They are shaped for a plot, for a condition. And we really focus on that. It's not something, a satellite that is thrown into an existing situation. But of course, what is context, and how close do I have to come? Do I have to continue this, or can I conquer? Can I try to maybe to bring enforce something, a situation that is. That is left over, has a stagnation that should be changed. So this is what we're interested in.
Yeah, I absolutely believe what you say. About the genuineness of the dialogue with the clients, and also with the sites, and with the conditions of a project, and so on. I guess my question perhaps touches more specifically about your particular sense of the culture of architecture, which I can feel is very strong. Yeah, I feel, rightly or wrongly, that your knowledge of architecture is very extensive and very sensitive. Your work very often reminds me of certain things which I have seen or which I know, by which I do not mean at all that I think the work is derivative, not at all. It's, for me, the enigma is the extreme formal diversity of the work, which it seems, to my mind, to be a development of what I know up to that point about Swiss architecture.
Yeah, maybe. But the thing is, the strategy to find a form or to go into, we wouldn't even talk about form. We'd rather talk about space. It's funny. The strategies are so different, and the parameters, they also differ from one project to the other. So maybe that's illustrates the diversity of projects finally. So the high-rise building, we said it's the task was living with a view. So it wasn't the idea of building something really high or vertical. It was more, what does it mean living with view? I'm here in a fantastic surrounding, I have views, and I have experiences maybe with height and with exposure. So the metal mesh, you can really stand at the edge of the slab and you're totally exposed at 50 meters above ground. So this is an experience you share everywhere. In the Alps there are no handrails and you could fall anytime. So this was interesting to actually more a detail or a narrative thing, and so this step by step grew into something, like this amorphous corpse.
Other questions?
It's actually kind of to follow on from the previous question, kind of related. In your mind, given your extremely diverse portfolio and stylistically kind of diverse as much as in terms of the genre that you're involved with, in your mind, when you think about your first-comers, clients that are first-comers, how do you explain as a practice to yourself, why do they come to you? If there is such a thing as a reputation, what do you feel your reputation as a practice is, and how does it attract the clients that come to you for the first time?
This is really this is a situation that has changed in the past years, and we do not like it so much. That people would come because they've looked at projects and websites and saying, all right, I've seen this concrete building, it looks so fantastic. It's horrible. It's actually more interesting just to see people or meet people and they do not know what they expect or what they have to expect. Mm-hmm. It's much more interesting not to talk about, this, I put it there. So to really start from zero, from scratch, and start with a dialogue. And but the other thing happens, and so really we normally give it a first phase, and let's say it's learn to know phase, where we say for free we do first sketches and we see what interests us and what interests in the dialogue with you, and this could really be the starting point for a process. But what we do not like so much is to kind of showcase. Although we do this, of course, but to showcase and say this is what we do, and yeah.
Well, second question again is kind of related again to that notion of reputation, supposed to brand. One of our clients once said that some architects would do exactly what you want them to do, and then why would you pay them? Others would do what they want to do and wouldn't listen to the client, which is a real problem as well. Now, there is a fine line between these two kind of types of architects that basically are there to listen too carefully, and the ones that just don't want to listen. So where do you feel you are between these two kind of...
Finally, we're Swiss, and Switzerland is a basic democratic country, and...
so you pretend you listen.
We, and this nation, and that nation, or our nation is based on compromise. So we always see a solution somewhere. So the thin line is a broad line, and let's just see how to start and where it could end. So, yeah, but it has to do with the, as I said, with the culture and with all these steps that kind of are needed or necessary till something can be seen as a built form.
Thank you.
Elena.
Yes, so just a quick question. And to thank you for a bit of poetry at the end of a very long day.
A bouquet of flowers, and some of them are wild.
I was quite interested in, if action causes more trouble than thought, I'm really intrigued to know what troubles you as a practice in terms of all the thinking, of all the action that you've done. We've seen a lot of projects which are land, which deal with the land, the wrapping, the nesting, the pouring. So I'm intrigued to understand for each action, what is it that is brought to your thinking and to your incessant investigations as a practice?
To be honest, this is what I talk about. It's also post-process. It's analysis of and I started with the exhibition in Budweiser, where I said it was also kind of astonishing for us to see what this to that, and well, that's a theme. And my partner would say, no, there are no themes. No, it's not. It's all in your head. But I've never thought about that. And so it's really the intuitive moment where we just feel that's what we like to do, and we do it, and maybe we lose, but we've done it. And it's more interesting to follow a certain route or an idea, visualize it, and learn from it. So it's not also it's not a method that is fully controlled and that we can say these are the steps that we have to follow, and then we come up with perfect houses or proposals. There is also maybe a lot of intuitive in it, and yeah, it sounds simple. You shouldn't say that in a I'm sorry.
No, it's always good if the complex sounds simple.
Sorry.
No,
Creative force.
I'm afraid I'm going to bring it to a close. Otherwise, we'll lose our reservation at the restaurant, and Andreas won't be fed tonight. I'm going to thank Andreas. But the way I would like to put this is, if this is the first time you're here, we feel honored that we were the ones to bring you, and we hope it's the first of many times you'll return and present your work and all its increasing complexity and richness. Thank you very much.
Thank you.